Please welcome Microsoft MVP, Belinda Allen. Today, she'll be showcasing premiering content in her session, Planning Steps for a Power BI Report. Please stick around after Belinda's session for a live Q&A.
Hi everybody, I'm Belinda Allen from Smith & Allen Consulting, and my job title of the year is Influencer for Data-Driven Decisions. And welcome to my session at DynamicsCon. I'd like to thank the people at DynamicsCon and all the wonderful sponsors that we have. How awesome is it that they provide this annual conference for us at no charge? I absolutely love it. So let's go ahead and begin. The topic for me today is planning steps for a Power BI report. And I want to share with you why I am talking about this today. I'm talking about it because I needed to create this content for me, and I thought one of you might be in the same spot. I've had a lot going on in my life this year, and this past year, as a result, I had 3 Power BI projects where I just fell smack on my face. It was terrible. Fortunately, I had a lot of other ones that had success rates, but I had to step back and think, why did these 3 fail? And regardless of what was going on in my life, they failed because I did not do the proper planning steps to begin with. After all these years of consulting, you'd think I would know better, but nope, I did not do it right. And that's why I just didn't have success on this project. So we're going to be talking about all the proper planning steps for a Power BI report. And it doesn't matter if you're a consultant, if you're a new employee who is charged with implementing Power BI in a company, or if you already have Power BI and you just need to create a new report. I mentioned I'm Belinda Allen. I've been in the community for a long time. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm a longtime GP partner and now a longtime Power BI partner. I'm an MVP. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, and I co-authored a couple books with the most wonderful Mark Polino. I'm sure everybody in the GP space knows who Mark is, on business intelligence and GP. I love learning, and my hobby's hobbies. So let's get started. Our agenda today, we're going to be talking about 3 very specific things. 1, what are the questions we need to ask to plan our project at the very start? What do we do in the middle of our project to keep it going? And what do we do after our project? And don't forget, we have Q&A live at the end, but don't let that stop you from asking any question you have during the session. I'll be on the chat live answering those questions as we go along. So let's move ahead. Now, these steps start before the project ever begins. You want to keep that in mind. Don't wait until you're in the project to start creating your steps. Do them before they ever begin. And the very first thing you need to do is think about your project team. And specifically, we call the whole team stakeholders. And so what is a project stakeholder? A project stakeholder, according to Wikipedia, is anybody who has skin in the game, anybody who's affected by the project. So if we're implementing a Power BI report, that would include people who use the report, people who manage the people who use the report, people who build the report, people who manage the data for the report, and the people who are affected by the outcome that the report yields. So basically everybody, whether it's perceived or a direct connection to it, all of these people are stakeholders. And we won't know who they are at the very beginning, but we need to be aware of who they are. Now, let me diverge from that for just a moment. You'll notice there's a blue icon and post-it note in the top right-hand corner that says resources. When I created this list, I scoured Microsoft, I scoured websites, I hit up my MVP friends, I hit up a lot of my power user friends that are wonderful power users for Power BI. And I got a whole list of great questions. I went through them and picked what I thought applied and put together my own list based on them. But all of those wonderful resources I have in my slide deck. So the very last slide is all of those resources, and a lot of them will have the link at the bottom too. So you'll know when I have a resource. And in this case, this came from Wikipedia. But let's keep going. Now, if we're going to work on managing our team of all of our whole project team, all the stakeholders, we need to identify those roles. And this is a wonderful resource I found. It's really pertains to Power Apps and Power Automate, but when they're talking about project management at the very beginning stages, it applies no matter what you're looking at. So if you go to this link, and again, I have it in the slide deck, so you might want to download that. You click on the download workbook in the black area in the bottom left corner, and you're going to get an 84-page PowerPoint deck. And that PowerPoint deck is filled with all kinds of information. And I have some of those slides in my deck, so I'll let you know when we're looking at one. This, by the way, is one of them. It's slide number 8 in the deck. And this is where you're defining different roles for your project team. And some of them will be different, like from the from the admins and the nurture team, they might be named a little bit differently, but you're going to want to create your list, and you're going to want to actually put names by them so you know who they are. In the early stages, you might not know most of them, but you should be able to identify the executive sponsor and the success owner. And the executive sponsor is the person who wants this report and wants it to benefit the company. The success owner is the person charged with making it happen. So you want to know who they are. And you might not even know who they are at the beginning of the meeting, especially if you're a consultant walking in and you don't know anyone there, or you're a new employee. You might not know who that executive sponsor is yet, or who some of the success owners are. So let's say we're walking into that first meeting. This needs to be a needs analysis meeting, and we need to focus on what the needs are. And at this point, we probably don't know who those two roles are. So the first thing we want to ask these people, oh, and by the way, you can see I have in the top right corner the resources. I also have an employee's name badge. That means that this really applies to outside consultants, and it probably applies to people who work within the company itself. So keep that in mind. If it's your own company you're doing this for, then and you're an employee, unless you're that new employee coming in implementing, some of these questions may not be quite like this one, may not be quite something that you'd want to ask. But this is an important question. Is your company already using Power BI? And if they are, what licensing do they have? Is it free? Are they using the pro version, premium per user, or the premium capacity? And this is a really important question to ask, because the answer to this question is going to tell you which Power BI components or which Power BI tools are available for you to do things. So, for example, you might find that a paginated report is the way you want to go. So you need to know, okay, well, you have a pro or one of the 2 premium licenses for that. Or what about metrics? Or what about using an embedded report? And if someone's using a free report, then sharing is not something that's going to happen either. So you really want to know, are they using the report? Next, you want to ask, oh, by the way, this has a resource, because if you go to where the pricing is, you can also see the different components that are listed there. So should just point that out. Next question, what is your experience with Power BI? Ask the person who you're meeting with. Not that they're necessarily a developer or they're even necessarily a citizen developer, but understanding what their experience is going to help you relate and translate and interpret their answers. If they have no experience with Power BI, then their answers are going to be very different than someone else explaining that report who has Power BI experience. So you'll need to understand what their background is so that you can interpret their particular answers. So that's pretty important. And besides that, at that first meeting in the needs analysis, they are likely to be one of these 2 important roles that we want to identify. And which one are they? Executive sponsor or success owner? Or are they somebody else altogether different? And we want to make sure we identify these roles, particularly the executive sponsor, as soon as we can, as quickly as possible. So it's very important we do that. And so, I mean, you could flat out ask them about that if they have, do you know who the executive sponsor would be? This is the role, or the same with the success owner. And that might be helpful. But identifying them as quickly as possible. Here's another slide from that deck, and I replaced Power Platform wording with Power BI. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the importance of understanding this quickly has to do with that highlighted paragraph. Having an executive sponsor at the C level is excellent indicator. It indicates that the organization recognizes the importance of Power BI as a strategic asset and is advancing its data-driven culture in a positive direction. And so we really want to identify that person as soon as we can, because that is going to help us create the steps and create the necessary plan to create the report. And the higher the level that person is, the farther up the chain they are, the easier the cultural buy-in by the end users will be. So this is really an important piece of the puzzle. Now, we want to ask them also, what are your expectations or your goals for the Power BI report? And write those things down. I get they may change over time, but we still want to write these things down. These were 2 answers I was given recently on a project after I created my list and began using it. And I just wrote down the actual answers. One was access to current data. They wanted executives and managers to be able to see everything through yesterday, every single day, from anywhere. I'm like, got it. Love that answer. And then they wanted to be able to make data-driven decisions. They had a lot of surplus inventory, and they wanted to know basically when they should put something on sale to get rid of it, because maybe it's not selling, maybe they have a lot of old inventory, or maybe they've accidentally overbought. These are things that I can easily measure and things that I could easily help them with. And regardless of what they draw out that they want to see, I know these are important goals to them, and I can make sure that they happen. And another way to ask the same question is, what item or items would constitute this project being a success? And this is really important because you can come back and show them at the end, hey, we met your objectives. This is successful. Yay, yes, right? Now, if the person you're talking with does not have an answer here, or they think they don't have an answer. Now, it's okay if they want to think about it and they let you know at the end of the meeting or shortly after the meeting. That's totally fine, because you might catch them off guard, right, with a question like this. And usually, if it's important to them, they'll put a lot of thought into it. But if you never get an answer, then that project's probably not going anywhere, right? Because that person is not the executive sponsor, nor are they the success owner. So at that point, you'd want to find out who that person is and go and ask that person the question. That's who you should be talking to. More slides from the adoption guide. So when they talk about defining success there, they talk about establishing KPI benchmarks using SMART goals. And it's like, okay, what are SMART goals? Well, fortunately, slide number 19 answers that. So S is for specific. Make sure it's clear and unambiguous, right? What, who, why, where. Those are very specific things. M is for measure. It needs to be concrete and clearly demonstrating progression, right? How are we building it up, right? A is for achievable. It needs to be reasonable, not extreme. If the company last year did 100,000 in sales and the goal is, we want this report to help us have 100 million in sales this year, right? That's not reasonable, right? So we need to make sure of that. R, realistic, same thing, right? We need to make sure we stay within the realities of the stakeholders. If the thing is, we want to have, if you're a consulting firm, you're like, we want to increase our billable hours by 500%. Well, there's only so many hours in a day. So unless you're going to hire more people, that's not realistic. I mean, there's no way you could charge more billable hours than exist in a 24-hour day, right? There's a limit. And then there's a time-related element. We need to ask when. So these are all part of the success criteria. And in relation to this, they also have taken the goals and the benefits that we had from the previous page, and they've put it in this guide. Now, I'm not going to read all of this because it's, you could download the deck and take a look at it. But they take the success measurement, and then they get a measurement method that, notice everything in the middle has a quantitative area, and then they have an example goal. Now, with this quantitative area, you could probably define some potential ROI, some return on investments for it. And you could start showing how you're saving and really saving the whole company money, you're increasing sales, whatever the case may be. You need to find a way to make it quantitative so that you could show the benefit of having the report and that data-driven information in the first place. And it also has just a blank sheet so you could work on it yourself. Now I want to talk about users, designers, and developers. Basically, this is everybody who's going to be part of the project, with the exception of, and not necessarily exclusion of, these the success owner and the executive sponsor. Because keep in mind those roles, if it's a small company, the same person might fall into a couple different categories here. Now, this is a slide deck I got from my wonderful friend, Chris Wagner. You might know him as Kratos BI, right? He has the whole data gods, and I was very honored to be the data goddess of inspiration. He and I have fun bantering back and forth, and he developed this whole great wireframing video where he put a lot of these questions in, and I do have a link to his YouTube video and a link to his website so you can go and download his deck. I've got a couple slides from his deck in here and watch the whole video series. He is absolutely wonderful. So let's talk about these users now. We need to know a lot about these users. Who are these intended consumers of the report? How are we going to share the report with them, right? Is it just internally? What's the size of the audience? Is it individuals? Is it teams? Is it whole departments? Is it the entire enterprise organization? Or is it public? And I've even added in here, we need to know whether or not these users have experience in Power BI and or visual reporting. This is really important because this is going to guide, and that one's my question, that's why it's italicized. That would guide how we build the reports. Now, one of the things that Chris likes to talk about, he likes to put, if it's not, unless it's some real giant report, he likes to put things on one page, right? So you have all these KPIs, and then you could drill down like a true dashboard. Then you could drill down to the supporting information for it. And that's great for people who have experience. If someone is new to visual reporting, you really need to have a curated experience where you're walking them through understanding the data and understanding how the visual works. So you might build a single page with drill down elements, or you might build something like a storybook that walks the user through it. It really depends on how the users, what kind of experience they have. And you might have a need for both, and there's nothing wrong if you have a need for both. Now, I have a quick quiz for you while you're watching. Do you show Power BI during this meeting? Think about it. I'm going to get a sip of water while you answer that question. All right, you have your answer? The answer is a resounding no. Of course you don't. This is all about you doing a fact-finding mission from them. You show nothing. You just ask questions and take notes. That's all you do. If they want to show you Power BI, all right. But you show nothing. You just need to find out from them. You know, it's interesting, the questions, when you're questioning someone, how you create a rapport with them. I remember attending, it was a sales class where someone was saying, oh yeah, I sat on an airplane and all I did was ask questions about the person next to me. And then at the end of the flight, they told me that I was the most interesting person they'd met when I had told them nothing about me and I'd only asked them questions. And so I kind of did experience that in a way. When I was in New York, I was part of a long sales process, and it was with waste management, of which I had no knowledge at all. But I went and I asked so many questions during the needs analysis and wrote up this long report that months later, when it finally came up and they're like, okay, we're doing it, I wasn't available. So someone else on my team had to do it. And they were upset because they're like, yeah, but you know our industry so well. And I didn't know anything. I had just asked a lot of questions. So that was a real learning moment for me. But we don't want to show them anything. That's a waste of time. It's not a demo. We are finding out what they need and what they want so that we can provide it for them. Okay, let's talk about the report. This time, the information came from another wonderful dear friend of mine who's a trainer, Mark Walter from Portland, Oregon. And his blog is listed down below, storybi.com. And all of his questions, he has a whole big form, are available on that link and at the resources at the end. So thanks to Mark for these. All right, so one of the questions he likes to ask is, and this is a great way to ask it, can you provide a summary of this report? I basically asked this too, but I added 3 of my own questions. Well, in bad grammar, do it already exist? It should be, does it already exist? And can you show it to me? So if it already exists, can you show it to me? And if it exists, why are you trying to change it? Are you trying to just move it to another system? Does it run slow? Do you have problems with it? Do you want it to be changeable? Does nobody know how to change it in your company? What's the deal with it? And if it doesn't exist, do you have a drawing of it, or, of what you want to see? Like, let's see the report. Let's see what it looks like. Let's see what you're already looking at or what you want to look at. And if they don't have a drawing of the report, again, this is also me, then you need to whiteboard it out. And this is the moment I would do that. I would then share your screen and say, pull up a whiteboard only, right? Or a blank Excel sheet or PowerPoint if you want, and draw it out. Don't get into too much detail about the different data sources. Do that at a really high level overview and get an idea of what it is that they want to see. And as we continue on the report, another Belinda question: are you on a calendar year or a fiscal year? There is so much time intelligence data on reports. This is something important worth knowing. And if they're on a fiscal year, then the next question is, are your fiscal periods calendar months or not? If someone is on a 13 4-week year, or their year is what we call 4-4-5, 4-week, 5 weeks, those, although they can be done, time intelligence can be done in Power BI, they're much more complex. If they're on a calendar month, regardless of whether their year ends in December or June or April, it doesn't matter. If the periods match up to calendar months, then doing time intelligence in DAX is very, very easy, well, relatively easy. So ask this question from the very beginning, because this could dictate the amount of time it takes to create time intelligence if that's needed. And back to Mark's questions. Why is this project needed? What questions is the report designed to answer? This is really important. They have a reason they want this report. They want to know, you want to know what story they are looking for their data to tell. This is where Power BI is, where we have our data, give us a nice story, right? Show us what it's about, what's inside of it. What are they looking for when they're in there? And all reports should be built so that the users can take action on those reports. So what action would this report be designed to trigger? What decisions is the report designed to support? And it's okay if their answer is, I know there's something in there and I don't know what it is. I don't know what to even ask of it. That's okay too. That's information you'd need to hear. What are the objectives for all the different users in the company? Now, report viewers and report analysts are going to be looking for very different things. Usually, and in technology, there's an exception to every rule. And if you don't believe me, think about how many times you hear the word caveat in a technology presentation, right? So a report viewer is going to typically be looking at what's happened in the past and evaluate between the past and right now, where an analyst is using everything that's happened to the past and right now to predict what will happen in the future, or to come up with how do I change what will happen in the future. So those are very different things. So what are the objectives for those individual kinds of users and for the overall business? And what insight are we really looking for the report? Now, you might want to even go into what insight second, what insight third. Keep drilling down to as many layers as you can, but ask the question, what insight are we looking to stand out? Now, in this particular case, if someone hands a report looking like this is obviously an Excel sheet. It's part of my fake data set. I have fake hospitals from TV shows, and I have the characters from Saturday Night Live who were there on the show the longest. And these particular people are the ones, I make them doctors, right, on the report. So that's what this is actually looking at. And I can see the balance of these doctors' accounts as we're on here too. And they hand you this report and they say, I want a report just like this Excel report. Your answer should be something similar to the answer given to us by Mike Carlo. And I call it Mike Carlo-ish because I've paraphrased it because I don't remember exactly what he said. But this is where you ask them in return, do you want analytics or do you want data access? And there's really no wrong answer, but Power BI is really built for data analytics, not just data access. And that being said, oh, and by the way, Mike Carlo's got a lot of great information from Power BI tips. His information's in the resources. Well, he also has a great blog called, podcast called Explicit Measures. Back to his response, it's okay if the answer is a paginated report's the way you want to go, because otherwise it's going to be a big whoop, right? Why do we putting it all in Power BI if it's just this data report? So saying paginated report or saying Excel report using Power Query and perhaps a Power BI data set for the modeling, that's all okay, right? So don't be afraid to let that be your answer if that's really what they want. If they're looking for data analysis, well, then Power BI is obviously the route they want to go. So now let's talk about data sources, because we're still in this beginning stage, right? We have an idea what the report's meant to do. We have an idea what the report should look like. And we have an idea about the users who are going to be using it. Now we need to know about the data. What are the data sources for this report? That's an important piece. Is the data source validated or certified, right? So we want to understand basically how accurate, how do we know that this data is accurate? If you're pulling it off of Wikipedia in order to get some table from somewhere, is that necessarily going to be accurate? I mean, are you making $1 million decisions based on somebody's Wikipedia entry? You have to know that, and you have to be thinking about that. What data validation checks are required? And then how are we going to connect to the data sources? That's really very important, because there are other factors to take into consideration, like query folding. If you're accessing a SQL server, then you could do more modeling in Power BI, although remember, we want to model as far upstream as possible. Is that even possible? If we're connecting via an API, can we do filters, custom filters in the API, or can we create custom API? So these are questions that we would want to answer. And for two of the reports that I told you I felt smack on my face with, these were problems that came up here. Like, who is defining the groupings if necessary? If we have to group the data, if the data is not as put together as we wanted to, who is going to be the one responsible for doing it? Because it could take a long time, right? Especially if you don't know the data that well and you're just having to dig through it to try to make it balance out yourself. And that's what I ended up doing to myself. So you want to watch that one. That one's really important. Who from the users is going to be there to help you do that? And who's going to help you proofread the data set when you get done? Now, one of the things I like doing here is there's always an Excel guru in the company. And I like going to the Excel guru, and they're usually a little bit defensive if Power BI is new because it kind of like infringes on their Excel. But if you take the time to show them Power Query in Excel and using data sets in Excel from Power Query, then now they have some additional tools to enhance their Excel, making them even a better guru for Excel. And then you could say for that person who helped you, so, hey, everybody, Chris helped me. Chris is the Excel guru. Chris helped me validate all this data, and we're going to use this, mark this data set as promoted. Thanks to Chris. Everybody applaud Chris. So now you've got Chris as an ally. You've got Chris helping you, back up the whole concept of using Power BI. And you validated Chris for making them the Excel guru extraordinaire now. So that's a really smart approach to take if that, comes up and it's available to you. So how will the reports be shared? How are we going to share them? That's something that you want to ask. Do we need to deal with Azure Active Directory groups as part of the sharing process? And what about row level security? Are we going to have that? How is it going to be filtered? How is it going to be defined? Is it going to be static? Is it going to be dynamic? And what about object level security? Are we going to want that deployed as well? Or does everybody just flat out have access to everything? And another question that I think should be asked, because these are some great questions that came from Chris Wagner and his wireframing thing. This last one is mine. If possible, or we deem it necessary, is it okay if we change the data source to improve security or performance? For example, if somebody is using maybe an Excel sheet or a SharePoint list, how would they feel about using Dataverse instead, or using Azure Data Lake or something of the like, depending upon what's going on? Would they be okay with that? Is that a viable option? Now, we've talked about the data. Let's just talk about some of the way the report will look. Branding and the user interface, how the report looks. So I want to start with branding. Ask for a branding guide if they have one. If they have one, use it. Use the colors, use the logo, and so forth. Now, if there's not a branding guide, I will frequently go and try to get the logo off the website. And then I'll put the logo in PowerPoint and use some of the PowerPoint editing features to find out the hex colors of the logo, so I know what those are. That being said, I strongly recommend that you edit or use a Power BI theme. And I have resources here because if you look at the bottom, Mike Carlo has a great link on his tool on his Power BI tips for themes to help you create themes. And by all means, I think you should use those. And this is a really big deal to me because I feel like anytime you're looking at visuals that have to do with either money, financial information, or revenue, there needs to be a color green that's being used. And the out of the box colors for Power BI, there's no green in there. And so that's weird to me. So by all means, I like to go in and edit the themes so that I can match their logos and it'll look better for them. So check out Mike Carlo's tips. And another thing I want to point out about that, if you use the logo, I like to put the logo on the bottom left corner. The most prominent part of the report is the top, particularly the top right corner. But the way we read, that's the most prominent area. I like to brand it with the logo, but I want important information. I want data in those important spots. So I like to put the logo in the bottom left corner. I note a lot of my friends, MVPs, Microsoft, and some power users still put it in the top right-hand corner. I prefer the bottom left. That way it's still there for branding, but it is not in a prominent place. I'll even occasionally put it in the top left, but I really don't like to put it in the top right-hand corner. So that also being said, the colors and the logo, sometimes some people will be won over by the report more if it's using the company's colors and themes. It doesn't make sense to me because that's purely aesthetic, but I've seen it. Like I could show people the same report, one without the company logo and colors and one with, and they always like the one with so much better. So take the time to do that on the report. Okay, so now let's talk about wireframing, and we're talking about Chris's stuff. If you don't know what wireframing is, wireframing in a very simplistic mode is basically doing a diagram of exactly what every screen will look like, right? And so a little oversimplified, but basically it's really more report designing and or if it's an app, you're building app designing or page designing. And so Chris kind of walks through his whole approach to doing this. And just a couple of things on this page. You notice the font's even different. That's because this came from Chris's deck exactly. He always talks about start with the user experience, which we call the UX, and understanding the audience. So he puts that first, most and foremost. And again, I do that with my design for someone with a visual reporting experience is very different than someone who doesn't have it. And laying out the page with a focus on the action. Remember, I said every report needs to help you decide what action you need to take from it. So those are some things that are extremely important. And Chris, he diagrams it out like this. So this is one of his slides. So in this particular example in the yellow here, he has this home page where he's putting everything on a single page. And then that page feeds lots of other information. Information that supports or validates the numbers on that particular page, including information on the report or maybe the data and a help screen. But he diagrams all this out, and his guide actually walks through how he's creating all of this information. And then he ends up with something that looks like this. This is a diagram of what he expects the visual to look like. And you notice he doesn't necessarily have all the individual like he has like what looks like a scattered plot here. So maybe this is a scattered plot, but it doesn't necessarily diagram absolutely everything out. But he kind of draws out what he wants it to look like with KPIs across the top left, and then a title of the report and the logo, a help button, some navigation across the top. All of this information, and this would be where you have the one-page experience with other pages that feed off of it to help validate and support this. Something that looks more like what you would do for a more novice user, you're keeping it cleaner, you have more white space on the back. I like putting text here. He had text on the other one as well, and text here, and I know Chris, he usually means something like a smart navigation. He and I both love smart navigation, or smart narration, not navigation, narration, smart narrative visuals. We love those. But in my mind, this text would help the end user explain what it is they're looking at on the screen. Also, perhaps with the help or even using tooltips can help explain that. I showed you some of the questions from Mark Walter. One of the things he does that's just fabulous is when he has a visual, he will create a tooltip, which is another visual that hovers over it that explains where the data is coming from. So you could literally see the data where it's coming from each, where it's filtered from each of the different data sources. It's absolutely brilliant and very self-explanatory. So drawing it out like this, very, very casually, not in anything in major detail. You know what I mean? He's not drawing out exactly the visual that will go here, just a basic look and feel on how it goes. And this is going to help that success owner agree or not that, yeah, this is something that looks like the way we would want it to go. Now, speaking of that UX, that user experience and ongoing growth, this is something I like to do. And this is really more after the project's been going a while and you want to test it out. One of my favorite pages to put on all reports is a page that just has 4 Q&A visuals. Now, I don't see a lot of people using Q&A. I'm converting people one at a time to using it. Why do I love that page? Well, end users, especially if they're novice, right? They're not used to visual reporting. If you create suggested questions for them, they could just simply click on those questions and now they have their own custom dashboard. And that's pretty astounding. Now, that helps them because they could even bookmark it in the service. So now they have their own custom page that's interactive. But what it does for you is you can pull up the Q&A setup window when you're in the desktop and you're logged in, and you can pick any data set you want. It doesn't have to be the one you're logged into. Go to review questions. And you can see all the questions that people have asked in the last 28 days. So you know what they're looking for. You know if they're typing in the wrong word. Maybe you don't have salespeople in your data set because your system calls them consultants and you didn't change the terminology from consultants to salespeople. So you could find that information. So you could see what they're asking. You could see the frequency at which it's being asked. And that will tell you, hey, maybe I need to consider a page that looks at this. So this is a great way to experience it. So my favorite UX by far, and it offers a lot of power to everybody, not just novice users, because you don't have to use the suggested questions. You could type in your own questions. And if your data model is good and your DAX is good, then it's going to work beautifully. Now, other things you can do, you could offer office hours on a regular basis. Doesn't have to be once a week even. It could be once a month, once every 2 or 3 weeks. And my recommendation to you is always have something to talk about. You could say, hey, somebody sent me this email, because if someone attends and they don't have anything to ask and you say, well, nobody has a question, I guess we don't have anything today. Then if they're on the fence as to wanting to use the product or not use the product, they're going to think nobody's interested, and that's not a good thing. So always have something to show them. Maybe even offer like a $10 gift certificate once a month to let someone do a show and tell. Maybe they say, hey, this is how I use this visual, and this is something I learned that I didn't know, or this is something interesting that I did, and get users converting other users. And that's a wonderful approach. And trust me, $10 is really cheap if you can convert someone into being a Power BI user. Encourage joining user groups like DynamicsCon. Get your other users to join and take part in the whole community and ask questions of each other and learn from each other. It's a great way to develop continued growth. And the last thing, and this is the resource, create your own Power BI Center of Excellence. And this is something Microsoft encourages. And a Center of Excellence is basically a team that sole purpose is to help grow this whole Power BI methodology, this whole concept of being a data-driven culture, and doing things based making decisions off of the data that's being driven. So they have some great tips on that, and that's something that could help you out as well. When the project is over, go back to that first page we created and see, did we achieve these defined success benchmarks? We want to take these numbers if we can quantify them into an ROI. We want to share that ROI with our executive sponsors and our success owners. We want them to know that they succeeded. It was a worthy cause, and they are making the company better and better. And then we want to review all our notes. No doubt, through the course of all this, you have created additional Power BI projects that need to happen. And you'll be astounded how you can keep growing everything. And finally, just to wrap up a few things here, I want to offer special thanks. I told you, I pointed out things from Microsoft and other MVPs and other friends. I meet with a group of wonderful people. We call ourselves SML. We study and learn Power BI together every Saturday morning. There are over 100 of us. There's a bunch of the regular names on the right. On the left, I took a screenshot last Saturday. I don't know where Jen Coons went, right in the middle. She's a GP MVP. But on this page, there are 5 other MVPs. The whole bottom row is MVP. And I mentioned Jen. And then Kristen, he's an Excel MVP. These are all wonderful people. I love them all. And I call them my support group. As promised, there is the page of all of our resources, so I encourage you to download the deck. And now it's time for our Q&A. I hope you got something out of today's session, and let's dig into some specific questions.